live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is Monday, July 16th, 2018. We're back on the air live, and I don't believe that anything in particular happened during my absence, so we may need to end the show early today. I don't know. Perhaps Greg will have different ideas. Perhaps the rest of you will have different ideas. You'll point me in certain directions. Armando may have something to say. I don't know. It might be that the Supreme Court of the land has a new nominee to an empty seat. It may be that the president who appointed him is illegitimate. It may be that he's a traitor. It may be that he's committing treason right now in Helsinki, Finland. I heard that pronunciation while I was over in the Scandinavian area. As you know, big trip to Iceland for me. Very icy, as expected. It is, of course, the summer, but they have some year-round ice in the glaciers there. Therefore, Iceland, I guess. I don't know. I heard all sorts of apocryphal stories about the naming of Iceland. It's wonderful. It's terrific. You should all go. This is my second trip, actually, to Iceland. I would go again. I would make it my beach vacation. I actually did make it to the beach in Iceland this time. Not that that's any great shakes for those of us so used to an American beach vacation. It's very interesting. It's nice looking. It's got black volcanic sand. I guess not all the beaches necessarily, but probably most of them. I mean, the places, and it's a volcanic island. I don't know if I made you aware of this, but really amazing place. Saw a lot more of the nature this time. They're doing okay. They say hello. You should go too. Lots of earthquakes while we were there. We just didn't know it. As it turns out, you can always look up. And basically, anytime you look at, there's websites. You look at how many earthquakes, show me the earthquakes in Iceland in the last X amount of time. And they're happening all the time. Every time you check, the last 24 hours was always, 15, 16 earthquakes. They were all just underneath, beneath 3 or so on the Richter scale. So, undetectable to people who, I guess, don't know what an earthquake feels like, or it's not very widespread effects, but they were happening where we were all the time. We went inside a volcano, which is not actually a volcano. It used to be a volcano. Now it's just a closed volcano. They moved all the merchandise out. Amazon took all the magma and has been delivering it around the world with drones. And really fantastic, a little bit of everything. So hiked on the glaciers, climbed the faces of ice crevasses. It's a small one. Very hard thing to do. Climbing ice. Very interesting. We were at the Glacier Lagoon, for which they have their own Icelandic word and everything. There's really only one Icelandic word, and all of them run together, and it covers everything. And it's just one long word. There's no spaces or anything in between their words, and that's the key to their language. I definitely recommend everybody take advantage of an opportunity, if you get one, to go there. And if you ever manage to put together a nice European vacation for yourself, but you want to go elsewhere, I will say the great genius of Icelandic tourism was the realization that it is on the flight path to most of Europe from most of the east coast of the United States. And they do this fantastic deal where if you take Iceland Air to Paris, London, Frankfurt, they will make a stop in Reykjavik, and they will arrange things such that you are able to stay over for 3 days or so. You can do it as long as you want, I guess. But a lot of people will do a 2 and 3 day stopover. Iceland Air has its own hotels. They will give you a deal. They'll put you up. Reykjavik is where the bulk of the activity is happening. You can't make much of a nature tour out without other transportation outside of Reykjavik. But even the environs of Reykjavik are fascinating and interesting and very almost Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones-ish, and I understand they filmed some of that there too. So everyone should see it if you can. If you can't, you should come over to my house and we're going to do a slide presentation. And all my cousins and my aunts and uncles will be there. It's not true, but I could invite them if you want to come over. Daily Coast Radio is live now. Kagro X is back from vacation, as Bill notes, all the way from Portland, Maine. Flew over Portland, waved to you twice. Don't know if you saw it. Once on the 4th of July, once on Friday the 13th. 2 best days to be in the air, as far as I can tell. We did see fireworks from the plane. That was part of the plan, and rather amazing and very patriotic feeling to be flying. Well, actually, we're flying out of the United States, but to fly over the East Coast at, an early evening and into the night, we really enjoyed watching it. And it's amazing how many fireworks displays are going on. Tremendous waste of money, really. Honestly, we should all get involved in going to regional shows. It's rather amazing as each municipality puts on its own show, and you can see what looks like fireworks displays almost run on top of the other, right next to one another, but there's actually several miles between them. But from the air, it looks very concentrated. So anyway, yes, I don't know if you saw me waving to you from the plane or heard the noise of my plane and looked up and said, I wonder if that's him. But yeah, I'm back from vacation in Iceland. Bill says, I will tell you what it's like to spend some time in the safest country in the world, at least according to the Global Peace Index. It feels terrific. You should go. The kids had a blast, which is a rare thing with a 17-year-old going on 18 and a 12-year-old going on 13. And it's hard to keep them both happy. But they both had a great time. Experience of a lifetime. The elder boy was very impressed, as I was. Took away a really interesting lesson. I guess, who knows whether he would have taken away this lesson without me intervening and saying, here's your lesson. But it worked. He was very impressed just with the system, the way the Icelanders handle their public utilities, really. I think I mentioned this after my first trip there, that I was super impressed with the water system. As you know, Iceland covered in ice. The ice is melting. And that's a bad thing in terms of global warming and all. But for water purposes, it's fantastic. Fresh, clean water that doesn't need to be treated in any way, which I imagine means that there's no fluoride in it. I didn't check the Icelanders' teeth while I was over there, but they seemed fine. They have dentists, and I guess that's the big difference. And the hot water, of course, geothermal, because of all the seismic activity there and the volcanic activity. It heats the water. The whole country gets hot water, basically, I think, for free. The cold water, same thing. There's just glaciers melting. They don't need to do anything to it. They just need pipes. So somebody's got to pay for the pipes, true. But in the meantime, the houses also, the homes all heated with the same hot water, just hot water radiators, and works very well for towel drying racks, too, in a nice apartment we stayed in. And he was just duly impressed with the idea. It was very obvious to him that the prices were higher, and that was because the taxes were higher. He's an economist, this guy. He really is. And he noticed, obviously, that the prices were higher. People's wages, he found, were also much higher. And jobs that we like to treat as menial and therefore worthless here in the United States, we pay people next to nothing to do it, and they live in near poverty, and then they can't really participate in the economy, et cetera, et cetera. But very different system there. Everybody's pretty well compensated. He noticed also when we were not tipping as much or as many places as we do because, of course, service was included in the cost of serving the meal, buying the meal at a restaurant, things like that. And he just really liked the idea that, look, the money is taken out up front. It's all a wash. It all comes out of your pocket, whether through taxes or tipping or utility costs or, as he thought more and more about it, healthcare costs for that matter. And I said, yeah, we'll go home and talk about that stuff. And you'll talk to conservatives about it, and they'll say, "Grr, that's socialism. That's what makes people not want to work hard." Except they seem to have taken care of it as well over there in Iceland. There's plenty of people working plenty hard and then enjoying a dip in the hot tub at the spa at the end of the day, right along with everybody else, because they make enough money to do it. And the infrastructure to build a nice thermal pool in every neighborhood, it's there, it's paid for. People seem to be working plenty hard. The place seems to be working just fine. And he kind of came away with this why do we do things like this to ourselves? We could do things so much differently. Things could be so much better and so much nicer. And it's always good to impart a lesson like that to somebody who's getting ready to go off to college and possibly, make economics his major. Yeah, you could teach us all a thing or two. That would be nice. So, educational trip as well as great natural beauty. You've been there, Greg Dworkin, now joining us. You've been there. You sang its praises as well. So, nice reminiscing for you.
We went entirely around the island.
Yeah.
And did the circle tour. And, it's pretty amazing. Do you miss your skier in the morning?
I do. I bought some when I got home.
Not quite the same.
It's not. I found if you add a little whole milk and mix it up and then put some granola in there, and you can go to the store and get nice compote, like maybe I can't find the rhubarb stuff that they used.
Yeah.
But it's very nice. You can make it a lot sweeter. Yeah, and if your only impression of skier is the smoothies at Blue Lagoon, that's poison. Don't drink those. The real stuff is great.
The natural beauty is really amazing, and
yes.
We got off the beaten path and went in places that were a little, dusty, tiny, one-liner in some of the tour books, and old meaning 300-400-year-old farmhouses that are still occupied by the same family, which really talk about Lord of the Rings, felt like you were in Hobbiton.
There are some amazing places, but
it was wonderful, cool. And I'm glad you had a good time. I'm glad the kids had a good time.
Yeah,
and I'm glad nobody got killed.
I am glad.
There's no rails and there's no warnings, and Icelandic philosophy is thanks for coming, hope you don't die.
Yeah, pretty much. There's really not much in the way of. There are a couple of signs. Don't crush our natural habitat. But as far as ropes,
you're
fences,
expendable,
etc.
But stay off the grass. Right?
Yeah, very trusting people as well. I noticed the car rental place. They were like, "Yeah, just park it over here at the airport. Leave the keys in it." Yeah, there's nobody here. We'll get there. And if it's taken, it's taken.
And for your economist son, it's an island.
Yes.
So everything has to be brought over.
Mm-hmm.
We saw the same thing up in Mount Desert Island and some of the little cranberries where the fishermen live up in Maine.
Oh, yeah.
When you're that far out, you got to ship everything up, and so it's going to add a little bit to the cost.
Right. And also, to his great dismay, the Eggins Applesin soda and the hot dogs not readily available here in the United States for the same reason.
Right.
Very
and
expensive
in Iceland, there's some things that are not available either. I just guess because there's no call for it. You may not have looked for it, but when we were there, we were looking for decaf tea.
Oh.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not big into that. I don't think they.
You can get herbals, but
yes,
but
plenty
it's
of that.
Like your regular Lipton style tea, only decaf.
Right. That's true. And I enjoyed my first minutes in Iceland witnessing a big argument between an American woman and the poor person behind the counter at the snack bar in the airport over why there was whether it was a proper thing to do not to have sweet and low out. But I mean specifically sweet and low. And I think the Europeans are like, saccharin is poison.
It's a chemical. Why do you want a chemical in it?
You don't have the pink one. No, we don't have that. We have Splenda.
Yeah, we have the yellow
not
one.
The pink. Okay. Well, I mean, she's like,
we have the brown one.
I'm working at a 7-Eleven. I just charge you what it says. I don't know why there's no pink. Sorry.
Right.
Very fun.
I don't know. People are funny. I remember spending one a summer vacation in Quebec City, another place I would highly recommend because the food is just fantastic. And we were at a bed and breakfast right in the center of town. And there was an American couple who were staying there, and that's when you want to tell everybody you're Canadian, but you can't because it's Canada and they know better, right? So, we're at breakfast. It's a bed and breakfast, so they serve a nice continental breakfast. And the Americans were complaining because the guy behind the counter wasn't speaking French.
Oh, wasn't?
We're in Quebec City. You're supposed to speak French.
I can't understand you, but please.
And the guy said, I can speak French. If you'd like me to speak French, I'll speak French. I don't mind. I was born in Quebec City, but I don't always like to speak French. I like to practice my English, So it's and this was the argument.
Huh.
That we're here for the color, and it's not colorful if you're not speaking French to us.
Interesting.
Do you understand French? No, we don't. I said, well, I'm going to say all sorts of things in French. And they left, and then he was laughing, and he said to me, if they knew what I told them in French, I don't think they'd like it very much.
I guess not, but they asked for it.
But they asked for it, so, whatever.
Everybody speaks English they're all linguistic geniuses, I guess. They just take English in school. Icelanders all, I think, I don't know. I mean, I didn't go into the office
I told you I found
buildings.
the one farmhouse in the middle. I mean, everybody generally lives on the rim because the middle's like volcanoes and glaciers.
Yes.
But there was a farmhouse toward the middle we went to, off the beaten track, and they did not speak English.
Oh, that must be
They only spoke Icelandic and German. Because they had spent some time in Germany as summer workers.
I see.
So they learned the language.
All right.
But it didn't matter. They were very friendly and made us pancakes for lunch and
Very nice.
showed us around. So, it was great. And again, I'm just so glad you had a great time while you were away.
Yes. What happened? This country had a different
Stuff
story.
happened. Well, it was only a week ago, but Brett Kavanaugh was nominated for the Supreme Court justice slot.
I managed to see that just before, I don't know, was it before I left? Or on the plane? I don't know. I did find that out.
He was the leading candidate.
Yes.
It was down to 3 or 4, but not really, because Trump had decided on this weeks ago, and he liked the let's do it at 9 p.m. on primetime television and get everybody to watch. And I'm not sure that everybody did. That's getting kind of boring. But he is a business-friendly, nice conservative, which is to say he would pretty much move the court very much to the right, make John Roberts the center. He's not Scalia conservative or Alito conservative, but not far from it, according to the ratings.
Yeah.
People who know him in Washington think of him as an establishment guy, so really don't have super problems with him. But he has a very, very long record. And among the things that he's written about is his distaste for the idea of investigating presidents. I guess that came from his serving on the Ken Starr investigation of Bill Clinton.
Wow.
So there's stuff to talk about. And Dave Leonard had a really nice opinion piece in the New York Times last week. This is no time for liberal despair. The fact of the matter is we don't have the votes. This is like DACA and closing the government down.
Yeah.
You may feel like you want to fight, but you really can't because you can't win that one.
Right.
So you have to pick and choose your battles. And if you pick and choose your battles, then it looks like you're caving. So what's going on here? Fact of the matter is the votes aren't there. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are going to vote yes. And Joe Manchin may vote yes. And Donnelly may vote yes. And Heidi Heitkamp may vote yes because they're in tight races in red states. They may all vote no. They may find other reasons. But they may vote yes. They were pressured to do so with the Gorsuch nomination. And that's just how things go. So you have to be realistic about it, said Dave Leonard. Leonard. Trump's nominee overwhelmingly likely to be confirmed regardless of what actions Democrats take. This is why elections matter, and this is why you can't sit home in 2018, by the way, folks. Republicans hold the Senate majority, and every Republican senator, including Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, has a history of voting for judges like those Trump is considering. I mean, that's just a fact.
That's very likely true.
Collins and Murkowski have a script. They make centrist-sounding statements to shore up their images, then they vote aye. So Democrats should go into the confirmation debate recognizing it's almost certainly unwinnable. It will not depend on how hard Democratic leaders fight or which tactics they choose, alluring as that fantasy may be. In these polarized times, court nominations unite political parties even more than individual issues like health care. Right? So that's the way it is. Elizabeth Warren called the coming nomination the fight of our lives. It's not. The great political fights are still ahead. When a new justice is sworn in this fall, Democrats should not declare generational defeat or turn on each other. Step 2 is don't lose hope. Theda Skopel at Harvard has spent decades studying political power and change from the Civil War to the Tea Party. In anti-Trump resistance, she believes Kennedy's retirement can be a clarifying moment for American liberals. Over the last half-century, conservatives have put more energy into building a movement, and the Democrats have concentrating on, winning the White House. And Democrats can't afford to do that anymore. Democrats can't afford to cede I will add, things like school boards locally.
Yes, true.
Or state senates, like in Virginia, or or North Carolina, because then you get bathroom bills and other things because you didn't pay attention. You got to get out and vote on every single election as if your life counts, because it does.
Yes, that's sort of the basic premise, but yeah, we don't do a good job teaching it.
Right. And step 3, know your strengths. Some Democrats will be tempted to turn the next 2 months into a national conversation about abortion, affirmative action, and other social issues that inspire liberal passion, and that would be a mistake. These are not the best issues for Democrats during a midterm campaign. You know what are? Healthcare and tariffs. And Trump, being a traitor and meeting with Putin today and
that cannot
giving away the story. I mean, that's the kind of thing that matters a whole lot more than abortion and affirmative action. It's not going to galvanize independents to get to the polls and vote for you. It will galvanize your base, but you can't win on your base alone. And the base doesn't need galvanizing. We're already pissed.
That's true, too. And it doesn't mean that they're not extraordinarily important to people to whom they are
We're talking
important.
about voting issues. Yes. We're not talking about whether or not they matter. Of course they matter.
They don't matter to people who don't care about them. That's the only thing. Yes.
The best issues are those on which Democrats hold a decisive advantage in public opinion: health insurance, taxation, corporate power, and Trump administration's corruption. Those issues can be grist for a nominee's Senate hearing. Right? So you could ask about whether or not Kavanaugh believes that Trump is above the law. That would be the kind of thing to hit him on. Right? And Leonard goes on to say,
no.
I'm not suggesting Democrat senators ignore social issues. They just shouldn't fool themselves into thinking the country's further to the left than it is. 2/3 of Americans believe abortion should be illegal, at least sometimes. And many of the strongest opponents base their votes on the issue. That's why Republicans are happy to have those arguments. That's like, abolish ICE. And Armando's been very clear on Twitter, that it's not necessarily the major salient issue to hang your hat on. That's not the hill to die on. Look, if people want to use that as a slogan, that's fine.
Yes.
And I'm of the camp that you shouldn't be policing people in terms of the language on whether they're allowed to use it or not allowed to use it. Just don't fool yourself into thinking that the public wants to abolish ICE. They don't. They're very clear in polls that they don't want to abolish ICE. So if that's what you're running on, you're going to lose. Just, by the way.
Well, in some places, you'll do better than others. But yeah, if you nationalize your election that way,
you win the races, you're always going to win. But if you're trying to win those marginal seats or slightly lean Republican seats that you need in order to retake the House, then no, you're not going to win.
That may be.
You're not going to win the House back based on
it. However, there are other things happening based on which you may actually win the House, even if you accidentally say abolish ICE in a place you shouldn't.
Yeah, it's not the biggest thing in the world. I don't really care if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says that in her district. That's fine. That's cool. Say it. I don't care. And I don't really care if other people do it, but don't make that the only thing that matters. And you don't need to go about policing people and say, don't say that. Say whatever you want, but just make sure that you're talking about health care and taxes and tariffs and corruption and the fact that Trump is incapable of serving United States interests when he meets with people overseas. If he's going to trash NATO and if he's going to be a Putin puppet, then that matters. And, of course, the big indictments that happened when you were away also matter.
Yeah, that was a tough one because that happened on Friday, and that was a travel day. So it was extraordinarily hard to actually keep up with what happened. And I guess before we exit the topic, we might as well, just in case anybody's upset about it, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will happily share with you her positions, clear as they are, on all of those things that you listed. And she also says abolish ICE, and that's fine for her district, and some in which she's campaigning.
And she may not vote for Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Crowley says that's okay, and it really doesn't matter. It's fine.
Kind of amazing.
It's all fine.
Okay.
And Joe Crowley was fourth in the leadership position. I mean, these are okay things. It's a diverse party. It's a big tent, and you can have as many opinions as you want. And as a matter of fact, along those lines, in the pundit roundup today, I have a Josh Zeitz piece from Politico that isn't even in the long list I gave you, so I'll put it at the bottom here. Mm-hmm. But it's a history lesson for never-Trumpers, and it's about how the Whigs fell apart and about how Democrats left the Democratic Party to join the Republicans 100 years ago when it mattered.
Oh, okay.
And it's a long list of all the things that happened in the run-up of loving your party but deciding it wasn't for you and you couldn't bear what was happening to it, so you left and you joined the other party. And these things happen, and so never-Trumpers are welcome to become Democrats, or they're welcome to be independents but vote Democrat, the way Max Boot will, and Steve Schmidt will, and these are all fine things. It's a big tent, and we don't expect them to all of a sudden embrace the social issues that we care about, but that's okay. You have to get the House back and win those elections if you really want to make any progress.
That's certainly a must.
Right, so Leonard concludes with this. Nothing in American politics matters more right now than the outcome of the midterms. It's a difference between emboldening Trump and starting to hold him accountable. That is to say, if the House is taken by Democrats, even those who don't want to abolish ICE but simply want to reorganize and change it, then that means that Trump will be investigated. And that will lead wherever it leads. Mueller's leading in a certain direction as well. The fact that Mueller has indicted a number of Russians, a dozen Russians, for essentially trying to change the results of the American election, not through changing the vote counts, but rather concentrating on stealing Hillary Clinton's analytics and using them to suppress the Clinton vote. That's what they did. We've always talked about how important get out the vote is, but there's also this thing called keep in the vote, KITV. That is to say, you want your other people on the other side not to be engaged in enthusiasm.
Oh, right. Oh, well, I don't have time to play that.
I know, but basically they worked on that to make sure that the marginal Clinton voters, and they knew who they were from stealing the data, wouldn't be energized.
Yes, and it seems that they succeeded in doing that. And there's still hanging out there is the question about how much time they spent trying to probe the actual possibility of it. Could we erase all the votes? We might check into that. I don't think they were able to do it, but...
And which Americans were involved?
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring, monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. I think we should just do another hour or so of reminiscing about Iceland. Sounds a lot better than the condition of our country here, but I don't know if that's what everybody tuned in for. We'll
talk about politics a little bit. But,
right.
As we were ending the break, and I'll begin the break with reminding people that suppressing the vote and making the marginal Clinton voters not that interested in trying to stir up trouble between Bernie voters and Clinton voters using the analytics that they stole from the DNC and from Clinton's campaign was exactly how the Russians interfered with the election. They may have had dreams of changing vote totals. I don't think they got that far, but they certainly had a profound effect. And for those people who say, well, there's no evidence they actually changed a single vote, then you're acknowledging, as Tim Miller, used to be Jeb Bush's spokesperson, noted on Twitter, you're basically saying, therefore, that campaigns don't matter whatsoever. You might as well just put the names up there and then do nothing, and people will vote the same way regardless. That's not how it works. Campaigns do matter. You can persuade people to vote for a candidate that they weren't considering at the very beginning of the election when the names were announced. Mm-hmm. And that's how that works. And the other side of the coin is that you could also persuade people to not vote for somebody.
Yeah.
And that's what the Russians were concentrating on. And the question on the table that hasn't been answered is that the indictment does say that there was contact with an American who had contact with senior Trump officials. Everybody assumes that's Roger Stone.
Sounds like it.
And that there's an organization, Organization 1, that was responsible for disseminating this and asking for stolen data, and everybody assumes that was WikiLeaks, and they also identified Guccifer 2 and DC leaks as Russian operations.
Yeah.
So the question on the table, it's still sitting out there, is what's the third part? They indicted the people who did the social media stuff, the troll farms, in the first set. This set was the Russian intelligence agents who worked directly for GRU, the successor to KGB. And then the third part that hasn't dropped yet of the three-legged stool is which Americans were involved. And that's what everybody's waiting for.
Right.
Was it just Roger Stone? Was it Don Jr.? Was it other people? Was it Steve Bannon? Who was out there doing this? And the very fact that the day that Trump said in public, I sure hope the Russians go and find those missing 30,000 emails, is the day the Russians tried to break into Clinton's server, and everybody made fun of the server, but that's the one that wasn't breached.
Yes.
Makes it seem like either Trump was asking for Russian help, or Trump already knew the Russians were doing this and gave them the signal that it was okay to go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That's still to come. But it's hugely important and can't be brushed off.
Yep. And, these things are, like we've reminded you before, circumstantial evidence isn't not evidence. We were all taught by, I guess,
it would be irresponsible
dramas.
not to speculate.
Right. Absolutely true. It's evidence. It's not necessarily conclusive, but it can add up, and the weight of the totals of the even circumstantial evidence can pretty much lead you to one or two unavoidable conclusions about.
Right. I think we covered Adam Davidson's piece a couple of weeks ago from New Yorker, saying basically, look, this is the beginning of the end game, and all the reporters know where this is going.
Yes, though some, for some reason, seem invested as usual and pretending they don't, but I think they like to be surprised.
Sometimes due to their editors, sometimes because they're dumb.
Yep, many reasons for it. And when we do find out who is the third leg of the three-legged stool, and we'll probably find out that a lot of these people involved are themselves two-legged stools, and we'll be rid of them once and for all, I hope. Although we really have no precedent for predicting. What do you do about if it's all true? What do you do? And that's
and we can do a whole show on that. But the fact is, you're absolutely right.
We're
at that point, but not past that point, so we really don't know what's coming next. And every single time the indictments have come out, they've been so exquisitely detailed. The one thing that I will say about the indictments is that they were perfectly timed in two ways. Firstly, they knocked Trump off TV when he was in England visiting. And secondly, they were done just before Putin-Trump sit-down today.
Yes.
Again, stealing a lot of the ability for Trump to say, oh, it was a complete and total success because I said so.
And he's angry.
It forces everybody to analyze what's really going on here because those indictments came out.
Right. And naturally, though, we are left with no idea what went on, and so instead we'll get Trump's version of it, and then we'll spend the next couple of days pointing out how each part of what he said is impossible or untrue, and maybe then upset. I guess part of his plan that we'll be stuck. We'll never be able to figure out what the two of them said. So
right, but if you're following media the way I do, you'll note that the headlines about the Trump-Putin summit are way less favorable than, let's say, the North Korean summit stuff.
Oh yeah.
So that indictment stuff had effect on how people cover this stuff.
True.
And it's there's a lot of people who are quite worked up about this. Margaret Sullivan has a piece today in the Washington Post about Bill Shine working at the White House, and are we just so saturated with scandals that we can't even pay attention to when stuff like that happens?
That's true.
Heidi Prespola, who covers the White House who does she cover it for? NBC News now. She used to be at Bloomberg, but now she's at NBC News.
I see.
Talks about the fact that the press can't just be stenographers anymore, and they can't just go ahead and write what Sarah Sanders says. And one of the things that got them all exorcised about that is that at a press conference, Trump refused to take a question from Jim Acosta from CNN.
Nice guy.
Acosta asked the question, and Trump said, "That's fake news. I don't take questions from CNN. Let me call on Fox."
Yes, I believe I saw Sarah Sanders trying to justify that somewhere along the line, and Trump tweeting, but he's actually a nice guy, or I don't know what that was supposed to be.
Well, Sarah
like
Sanders
there.
said we canceled Trump officials' interview at CNN after Jim Acosta disrespected Trump. And Heidi Pressbilla said the media needs to stop headlining stenography in the Trump era. Acosta tried to ask a question. That's all.
Yeah,
so
press conference.
you attack one of their own, maybe they're getting a little backbone here. So we'll see how that
I hope so. But
plays out as well. Meanwhile, in the real world, this is from the Washington Post today. The Finance 202 being the area code for Washington. So
yes,
us non-Washingtonians always have to remind ourselves, why is 202 in all the headlines here? The Finance 202, Trump's trade offensive is producing brutal local headlines. Coverage from the front lines where the tariffs are already biting businesses of all sizes signals even more acute pain ahead if Trump continues escalating hostility. It stands in stark contrast to the cavalcade of positive headlines rolling in 6 months ago as employers handed out bonuses in the wake of tax cuts, which sometimes they rescinded, sometimes they didn't follow up.
Yeah.
Right? A fly around of pieces from over the last few days. A fly around? Is that like flyover country? A fly around of pieces from over the last few days paints the picture. Several of these were tweeted by Scott Lincicome, a Cato Institute scholar and trade attorney critical of the Trump trade offensive. And as he noted, a simple Google search turns out many more. In Iowa, Mike Naig, the state's Republican Secretary of Agriculture, told the crowd at the Central Iowa State Fair on Friday, the administration needs to resolve its fight. When retaliation comes targeted at agriculture, we're bearing the brunt. We cannot continue to do this. Current commodity prices are not equaling the cost of production. There's been a 20% drop in prices. In South Dakota, Kohlberg Pioneer, which manufactures equipment for making crushed stone and gravel, is contemplating its second price increase of the year. These costs are going to have to be passed along. All the variability really hurts your business. At the end of the day, I don't know what the end game is out there and where we get out of this. Meanwhile, the Sioux Falls Argus leaders, Dana Ferguson and Jeremy Fugelberg, report the trade fights cost South Dakota farmers and ranchers hundreds of millions of dollars. This is what they're reading in the paper. In Utah, steel tariffs could add roughly $15 million. In Wisconsin, with new tariffs on greeting cards, tissue paper, napkins, toilet paper, and even playing cards, Canada puts pressure on a range of products that has represented more than $2 billion in exports from Wisconsin to that nation over the past decade. And then in New Hampshire, the administration's confrontations with China and Canada are making some goods costlier, leaving Granite State companies to change their plans. By the way, they're screwing the Maine lobstermen. I got to throw that in there. Among those feeling the burns in New Hampshire, the Little Bay Lobster Company in Newington, the company has shipped more than 50% of its lobsters to China, or around 50,000 pounds a week. After China imposed a 25% tariff this month on U.S. lobster exports, things changed. The Canadian lobster is so much cheaper than the U.S. lobster now, and Canada and the U.S. have warred over lobster prices before, but that's just a sampling, and they give another half a dozen headlines. In North Carolina, Trump's trade war with China could affect local jobs. Missouri, trying to keep the faith. Missouri farmers brace for Trump's trade war and drought. In Mobile, Alabama, local leaders say Trump tariffs threaten Mobile economy. New London, Connecticut, local manufacturers feel the pain of aluminum and steel tariffs. And South Bend, Indiana farmers not exempt from prolonged tariff battle. Gives you an idea that if you go local and don't just look at the national papers, this is not good news.
Yes. Well, lobster's supposed to be expensive. I don't have a problem with that one.
Well, yeah, the further away from Maine you are, the more expensive it should be.
Right. Well, China. Come on.
Now, in the meantime, Trump's numbers are steadily staying about where they are, if anything, a little erosion. Approval of Trump's handling of immigration policy is lower than his overall approval. A Fox News poll had Trump's handling of immigration approved 39, disapproved 58, which again makes the point that baby jails are not a winner that the Nazis in the White House thought it would be. And that is absolutely worth contemplating. So I'm just trying to catch up on all the topics that we missed over the past week and a half.
Yeah.
I think today's big topic, obviously, is the Putin-Trump sit-down. And in this Daily 202 by James Hohmann, the regular, normal, overall
not
202, as opposed to the Finance 202,
right.
The Health 202.
Stupid one.
Yeah, the Daily 202. GOP senators downplaying Russian interference shows how Trump has co-opted the party. The big idea? Last year in an interview on Super Bowl Sunday, Bill O'Reilly challenged Trump over his desire to improve relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin's a killer, said the then Fox News host. Well, there's a lot of killers, Trump replied. We got a lot of killers. Well, do you think our country's so innocent? Take a look at what we've done, too. We've made a lot of mistakes, a lot of killers around, believe me.
Believe me.
At the time, Republicans pushed back, but now, not so much. And by the way, the indictments, the sit down with Putin, these are all reminders that Mitch McConnell did nothing about Russian interference at the time he knew about it. And everything that highlights the fact that McConnell was complicit in allowing this to happen, I think it's important for the American public to have that filter in.
Right.
None of this stuff's going to change minds directly overnight. There's not going to be a plunge in Trump's numbers. But he's never been able to get above his ceiling of 44, 45. Sometimes he sinks to his floor and never goes below it of 35, 36. Right now he's about 42. There's a 10-point gap between dislike his job approval 52 and approve 42. But he's done nothing whatsoever to increase people outside his base. Everything he does is base-centric, and that's okay for, a strategy if you want to lose. So that's what he's doing.
I want him to.
And he's doing it consistently, but, it's not working the way he intends. The tax cut didn't work the way he intends. This immigration hardline stuff isn't working the way he intends. The tariffs are not working the way he intends. So we'll go from there, and we'll see what comes out of this summit that we don't really know, because he's going to make stuff up. And again, you can't be stenographers and just write down. Trump says Putin meeting a success. What the hell does that mean?
Huh. He lived. I mean, as far as I can tell, I don't know what else he.
For now, he wasn't poisoned, right?
We think. I mean, not
Meanwhile,
looking that good, right?
Germany's foreign minister today. We can no longer completely rely on the White House.
No.
Duh.
Were they?
Well, they used to rely on America. America used to be reliable. We used to be leaders of the free world. Now Angela Merkel is.
Well, so good for you, right?
Right.
What are you so worried about?
And with the Trumpification of the party, not only do they not give him a hard time about meeting with Putin and blaming America first, which is what he does.
Yes.
But there's a piece here by Jenna Johnson in the Washington Post today. With Trump in the White House, candidates who sound like him hit the campaign trail. In last week's debate between Georgia's Republican candidate for governor, policy was quickly abandoned as Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle and Secretary of State Brian Kemp lit into one another with a familiar slate of accusations. Kemp called Cagle a liar. Cagle accused Kemp of conspiring with another Republican to release a recording of an out-of-context private conversation. Kemp accused Cagle of spreading fake news. Cagle repeatedly refused to apologize for saying what he says. In a state where President Trump enjoys higher than average popularity, these two Republican candidates have not only bickered over which of them has supported the president for the longest, or who would most warmly embrace the Trump agenda, they've started acting like the president, using some of his nastiest campaign tactics. And in races across the country, other Republican candidates and some Democrats are branding their opponents with unflattering nicknames, tweeting in all caps, refusing to apologize for things that apologized before, being profoundly politically incorrect, circulating false information, calling their hometown newspapers fake news, releasing damaging information about their opponents, and generating controversy to get headlines, even unflattering ones. Trump's style was such a departure from anything we used to see in a presidential campaign. His willingness to just go all out and criticize heavily somebody, call him names, engage in schoolyard talk, said Kerwin Swint, a political science professor at Kennesaw State University in Georgia. Candidates this year are more willing to go out there with a sense that a precedent has been set, or that it works, so why not do it in my own race? Although it's unclear if the tactics will work for many candidates other than Trump.
Yeah.
So, this is all about breaking norms and some of the stuff we talked about on the show. We have shared values, and when you break them, you encourage other people to do so. You may, think that it's inappropriate to openly be racist, but that's PC, and so now I get to say whatever I want. And what we're seeing today is pretty horrible and making a lot of people feel very, very uncomfortable.
Yes.
So good strategy in the long term? No. In the short term, they think it'll win for them, but boy, is it bad. It makes, feeling like this country is going in the wrong direction and splitting apart more than ever. And the main person to blame that on, of course, is Donald Trump, but Republicans who go along with it are just as guilty, and that's why I never want to forget what McConnell did.
Yes, and it's the most unfortunate part of it, I think, is just I guess there's a silver lining to it in some of these cases, but just the huge trend in circulation of what becomes viral videos of just what we used to think of as regular Americans, like parading around being openly racist. And the silver lining being they are almost always then identified, fired from their jobs, and ostracized from polite society. And that's nice, but it'd be better if it didn't happen in the first place. But just the trend is unmistakable and incredible. I mean, obviously, there's always been racists and even open racists, and maybe it's just that we haven't videotaped enough of them to this point. But you have to get this. I certainly get the sense that they're taking cues from their political leadership, which is what we've always been told was the case. So I find no reason to disbelieve that people take cues from their political leadership. It's amazing. Trump will never, of course, acknowledge that anything happened. It's not me, and even if it was, maybe it's not even a bad thing. But yeah, it's been pretty horrific, and thankfully it's still the exception rather than the norm, and thankfully we still arrest these people when we identify them. But I hope that part of it never goes away. Then I really lose hope.
Right. Let's see, just to round up a few things before I finish my segment here and give you a chance to reorient yourself to doing a 2-hour show. I have a couple of things about why Trump voters and that base never seems to vary from him. This one was interesting. It's by Charles Homans from New York Times Magazine. It's called Americans Think Corruption is Everywhere, and that's why we vote for it. And it's an interesting concept.
Okay.
He interviewed somebody from the Philippines, Duterte and how bad things are there. I came from the Philippines, right? The second woman said, when corruption sets in, it doesn't stop at the top, it goes down. Every appointee will be somebody that's corrupt, that can be corrupted, and can be silenced. And you think Trump can stop that, I asked? Well, I'll take him because I know what Hillary did already. So this is where the Russian troll farms and the, keeping the vote sort of thing come into play here. And what Homans finishes the article with is saying, what's incredible about this is not just that so many Americans now accept the sort of drastic rhetoric that usually only flies in countries with actual existential corruption problems. It's the fact that so many people accept it from, of all people, Donald Trump. The Democrat IT scandal is key to much of the corruption we see today, he tweeted on June 7th. This is a week before New York's Attorney General filed a lawsuit seeking to disband Trump's philanthropic foundation following a 2-year investigation alleging extensive campaign law violations and extravagant self-dealing. Trump blamed the lawsuit on sleazy New York Democrats, but the state's evidence included a note in Trump's own handwriting diverting foundation funds to his personal legal expenses. So the point is that people have, it's like the whole thing about Republicans saying government is the problem, government is the problem, government is the problem. Then they're elected and they're the problem because they're the government. And people will say, yeah, but, look, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can't elect Democrats because government's the problem. What's the difference? They're all corrupt.
Yes.
It's all part of that. Let's not have any sense whatsoever that government can help you in any way. Because when you do that, it turns out to be an asymmetric effect. It helps Republicans. Same thing with corruption. If you try to run as a good government, I'm not going to be corrupt. And everybody says, well, why should we elect you based on that? Everybody's corrupt. So that, what else you got?
I guess there's that. And then, of course, if they find anything that is in any way looks untoward, then it's the hypocrisy charges. And for some reason, that stings and sticks better than somebody who says, I've always been corrupt and I'll continue to be corrupt. Right. Okay.
I'm a wolf and I'm going to eat you, sheep.
Right.
And I'm being totally honest about it.
Yeah. Well, he tells it like it is.
Exactly, as the famous cartoon says.
Right.
At the same time, the flip side of that is that people really do care about these things, despite what they say. For example, you can find polling that says that Mueller himself personally is less popular than he used to be. But when you ask about whether the charges he's talking about and looking into are serious, 55% of the country in a CNN poll recently said, yeah, it was, and 38% said it wasn't. So they haven't succeeded in convincing people that it all doesn't matter. And here's a couple of tweets yesterday or on the 14th of July, a couple of days ago, from Russ Douthat to kind of illustrate that point.
Oh.
He says, one reason I've been skeptical Mueller will find clear collusion evidence is it isn't clear why the hackers would have needed to collude with Trump's campaign to achieve their Trump aiding objectives. They didn't need Don Jr. or Stone to tell them how to leak emails, but Democratic campaign analytics would have been pretty much required collusion to be effectively deployed, so that's very interesting. And so that I conclude from that the Mueller report and the Mueller indictments, when they are finalized, actually will matter. And the campaign to discredit them really has failed. They may make Mueller personally unpopular, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is the subject content. And that remains something that's quite interesting to the American people, and that has not changed.
Well, I hope it doesn't. I don't know how much longer we have to wait on all this, and it does feel like
he's trying to get it done before the end of the summer. He just did this big one, so
okay. I mean, he hardly ever announces anything, so
no, but that's what people close to the investigation say. He's trying to wrap it up. You can tell because people like Flynn are coming in for their final plea bargaining stuff in terms of what the sentencing is going to be. And at the same time, you see a little bit of paranoia in the Republican House because now they're talking about they being Jim Jordan. We haven't even gotten to the Jim Jordan scandal. Right. People in the House, especially the House Freedom Caucus, are talking about impeaching Rosenstein.
Yes. And I saw people were saying, they could even have papers as soon as today, Monday.
Yeah, go right ahead. That would be interesting to see when you try that after the indictments.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know where that's supposed to be going. But by the way, one of the things that we missed also, Pruitt and his departure. Right as I was taking off, he was finally.
That Wilbur Ross is corrupt, and that's come out too.
Yes.
But I think I'll leave you with something a little bit funner.
Okay.
And that is today's word.
Today's word.
Today's word is pronoia.
Pronoia.
It's an opposite of paranoia.
Oh. Well,
it's the belief that the universe is conspiring in your favor. John Cleese brought it up on Facebook because Trump goes to England, insults the Queen, keeps her waiting in the hot sun for 10 minutes. She's 92 years old. Then walks in front of her whenever he walks. All of this is against protocol. And then tells the public that Theresa May's a jerk for not listening to him because he told her the way to fix Brexit, which was to sue the European Union. and by the way, everybody in England loves me. And Cleese said, he's pronoic. He thinks he has this delusion that everybody likes him.
That is amazing.
And so I think it's a great word. The opposite state of mind, the paranoia, when you think everybody's out to get you.
Yeah.
Pronoia thinks everybody's out to help me.
It makes sense as a word. It doesn't make sense as a worldview for him. But here is something that does make sense as a worldview, and that is that. And I saw this on Twitter, and I wish I could credit the person, but I can't find it. Trump sees countries as businesses and the leaders as CEOs, and he loves dealing with people who are strong CEOs because then he can talk one-on-one and get stuff done. But with weak CEOs that have to go to their board to get anything approved, like England or Canada, a lot of these messy democracies who have legislatures that interfere, it's really annoying, and he hates those. So he, the CEO of his company, would like to go abroad and just talk to the CEOs of other companies. Nobody else, because he's got to be with people who, have his same rank. Right.
And, of course, at the same time, he gets really annoyed when his own company says, you know what, we don't like you so much.
Yeah. Or there are rules, or we have to vote, or
that's his governing philosophy. But the pronoia part that will not allow for the fact that he's not popular, or that his crowd size was small, or that any of the other things that are real, that he'll make up stuff to pretend is otherwise. Like, he won all 59 states, and no other Republican has ever done that. That kind of stuff. That's pronoia.
I guess that's a good word for it. I'll see how well that fits. It is amazing that he could possibly think that after all this time, but he doesn't read.
As things slip away, you'll see it more and more. That's my prediction, and I'll put the marker out there now.
Okay, I'll accept that. By the way, one of the great lies of the last couple of days, I think he said somewhere that since he's been president, he's doubled or even tripled the GDP, which
Yeah.
I guess tells me he doesn't know what GDP is, but
Yeah, he thought it was GRU.
maybe. That could be. Yeah, I don't know
got
the
him
difference between
confused,
HPV and HIV, and I don't know
Clearly,
the difference between
he
GRU
didn't.
and
Somebody interviewed him in England about Brexit, and he had no clue as to what it was. He rambled on for like
cereal.
10 minutes without having any idea about what Brexit was.
But they make great product, England. Or
Yeah,
UK.
exactly.
You can say both, I love that bit.
All
That
right,
was
so
fantastic.
that's it for me. Just rounding up and keeping you grounded for the first hour, letting you, ease back in, stick your toe in the water. But
I'm
you
done.
got the next hour. You're on your own. Bye.
Okay. I'm jumping into a volcano. Phew.
Warm, at least.
Yes, that's true. It's pretty hot out here as it is. Thanks, Greg.
Get geothermally roasted because it's better roasting that way naturally than like otherwise. All right,
yes.
take care, and I'll
Thank
talk to
you
you on Wednesday.
All right, very good. And thanks for your help in getting us started today. Ooh, I forgot to ask. I'll ask you on Wednesday, but we'll do more Iceland reminiscing. We should be sponsored by the Icelandic Tourism Board here, but that's socialism, and so we can't do it, or something like that. Anyway, let's see. We're just about up against our top of the hour break, so no sense getting all into tangents that are going to take us over to the other side. But we'll take a quick look at the many other things that I put in pocket. There's probably no catching up on the indictments all at once, and I am pretty sure that you probably all did some voracious reading over the weekend on your own. So it would be foolish for me to try and catch you up on things. But as the days go on, we'll see more and more digestion of the indictments and analysis of the indictments, and we'll share all of that and probably be talking more about that than about what actually happened in them, or reading them verbatim, that would be. I did mean to get back to Scott Pruitt. I just wanted to make a quick reminder to those who are longtime listeners of the show or readers of the various blog posts in my history with all of that stuff. Just a big reminder, not that Republicans would go ahead and do it, although they've got a better chance at doing this with Scott Pruitt than Donald Trump. You can impeach government officials who have already resigned. It's allowable. It has been done. It's A-OK. It might be a waste of time, but it's out there. Think about it. I'll tell you why at some point in the future. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and here in the United States of America as well. No longer broadcasting out of Iceland either via reruns, and thank you very much. A huge thank you to everyone who supports everything over here. Justice Putnam stepping up and helping us fill the gaps with reruns, and I know that some of you probably felt like that's not filling the gaps at all, but it could have been just dead air, or it could have been any number of other substitute programs that didn't have anything to do with this show. And in the hectic race to get the trip finalized and prepared and get the kids ready to go, get myself ready to go, take care of so many other things, I wasn't able to record I recorded a lot of material. I wasn't able to weave it into a coherent show, or as many shows as I wanted to do. I mean, ideally, I wanted to leave you with fresh material each day, but I think that's a little bit. I don't know why I expect that of myself. I needed like 10 days worth of shows, and that was going to be pretty tough. There was a lot of recorded material that I did that I didn't get to present to you because I couldn't finish it up and fill out a show. That's one of the difficulties. Is sometimes I think, what I'll do that's in my spare time, so much spare time, leading up to the trip, I'll record stories one at a time, and then later on I will simply use the editing program and build them back into a show. But then building it into that same 2-hour window, especially if you use the breaks, and I eventually abandoned the use of the breaks while we were away. But it's still a difficult thing to do. You get yourself to the point where I have 13 minutes to fill. Are there stories that fit that? And I think I find one that says, I can do this in 13 minutes. And then I start expanding on it, as I usually do. And then I find, now this story is now 17 minutes long. How am I going to deal with this? So we ran into a couple of bumps along the way. But I think I think we did a relatively good job in leaving you not only with the reruns that we chose, And some of them were, at least one of them was by special request. We had an actual request for it. Could you bring us the reading of the Swedish Jewfish post from Daily Kos all those years ago? We all knew about the trafficking, part one, about Donald Trump and the Trump Modeling Agency. And that turned out to be timely as well, because that stuff came back up again while we were away also. And as did the use of reruns from exactly a year ago. Most of those reruns about the then breaking scandalous news about the Trump Tower collusion meetings, and of course, well timed with the additional indictments, etc. And then, of course, the FIFA stuff, which was dug up on purpose to bring back up during the World Cup. We are done with the World Cup now. And I guess we now congratulate France on having won the World Cup. I think they went in as the favorites. And guess what? They won. So not that exciting in terms of dramatic finish, but I think it was a big deal that Croatia made the finals. And, of course, Iceland was in it for a little while. They were this is the first World Cup that there was lots of soccer paraphernalia available over there, and they should have been discounting some of this stuff because they were already out by the time I got there. But big item, I don't know how well it's sold. I think it's sold to Icelanders. There were lots of T-shirts around that said waiting for the World Cup since 1947, which I guess is meant to mean since there's been an independent Iceland, for one thing. How long has the World Cup been going on? Is that what it was meant to be? I'm not certain which what they were referring to here. I think it must be the age of the World Cup, because I think Iceland actually declared independence in 1944. I don't know. I read a little bit of history while I was over there, but all kinds of good things. I was hoping that the Iceland national team jerseys would be, discounted on sale. I thought, that would be a fun thing to get. I wanted to buy one of those when I was there the first time. The Icelandic soccer team, the men's soccer team, wasn't yet famous, as a Cinderella story because they hadn't made the previous World Cup. But 2 years later, and the Euro Cup was when they really broke out. And I looked all over Reykjavik, and it just wasn't something that was for sale there. That wasn't a tourist item. And I thought maybe if I went to the local mall, like the sporting goods store, I would find that, but I never made it there. And it was easier to find jerseys from the team handball team in Iceland than for their soccer team. This time, of course, the soccer paraphernalia was all over the place, and they were selling their team jerseys for about $120, which was a little over the top in terms of how I felt about the Iceland football team. And honestly, it wasn't a stellar looking jersey. And then, of course, those are pretty clingy things. It's great if you're a soccer player, you look fantastic. And if you're not playing soccer actively, that's not necessarily the design and cut for you. And $120 later, you'd have to be a real super fan to want to be caught dead in one of those things. Anyway, that wasn't where I meant to go, but it was supposed to be the segue over to, I came back to discover this article and then put it in pocket for discussion. Think Progress, moving on to the next World Cup. And I thought we did a pretty good job in positioning ourselves for being ready for the seamy underside / corruption stories about the World Cup. We got you ready for it about 3 years in advance. So that's pretty good. But now we're getting ready for the next one. Think Progress has decided they want to join the party in this one too, getting you ready for the next World Cup 4 years in advance. Qatar. I still have not decided exactly how to pronounce that country. Back in the news, never really left. They, of course, are the site of the next World Cup, which is amazing because it's 1,000,000 degrees in Qatar. And I don't know if you've ever played any soccer, but you have to run around a lot. And it's very hard to do when it's hot. Russia, I guess not quite as hot, although, it's no Iceland, but I guess some of the locations maybe aren't, it's no Qatar, certainly. But there you have it. They're going to play the games, I guess, and I don't know, when's the timing of the games. Sometimes they monkey with the things like in the Olympics. You can move them around a little bit and get more seasonable weather, but I just don't think there's any, pleasant weather in Qatar. I don't know. I may be very unfair to the Qataris, but I think it seems like a pretty hot place. And then secondly, it's small, and I don't know how many soccer stadiums they have. Apparently they have to build an awful lot of them, but so did Russia, and that was part of the corruption. And so I guess it all fits. Jason Lincolns wrote this piece for Think Progress. Qatar uses bribery and slavery, two of our favorite things, to prepare for the next men's World Cup. That's to be pointed out again, because the women's World Cup, I believe, is played next year, and we pretend like it's not there, even though, for one thing, America is in it, and not in the men's side. And we keep discovering journalistic mistakes about the World Cup, like people saying, well, such and such a team has never made it. Oh, yes, they have. The women have made it, or they have won, or whatever. They've broken thus and such a record. Oh, yeah, right, the women. And I feel bad about that because the women's soccer game is every bit as interesting and elegant as the men's game. And there are some, I guess, some sports where, though it's played by both men and women, I don't know, some people are just big critics of the women's game as compared to the men's game. And there's some physiological differences, but soccer is just one of those things that the sport lends itself to play by both genders very easily, I think. And this is where I suppose competing men against women would show some considerable difference. But there's none of the power, none of the elegance, none of the strength and endurance. It seems like it's missing in the same way that it sometimes can be in other sports where it just seems like it's in some ways diminished. And I suppose that there are probably sports that work the other way and that the men do worse at. But I don't know. That wasn't where we meant to go with it anyway. We wanted to talk about the bribery and slavery, which are almost certainly bad things, as opposed to the bad light in which I'm presenting my sports commentary. Okay, let's go over the much more organized thoughts of Jason Lincoln's on this. The 2018 Men's World Cup is in the books, with the French men's national team prevailing over their upset-minded Croatian counterparts. That's very flowery. By the score of 4-2, in a game that featured enough flashes of brilliance to serve as a fitting capper to a tournament that routinely offered soccer fans riveting moments to savor. Very exciting. And there were some very exciting moments. A lot of very interesting stuff. But alongside the thrilling matches themselves, this World Cup was suffused with a heavy dose of geopolitical drama, a perhaps inescapable condition of international sports. As my colleague Luke Barnes reported, Jason says, this World Cup ended up being something of a soft power coup for Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Throughout the tourney, the cameras captured what looked to all the world to be a welcoming, efficiently run nation free of discord. Traveling fans got a healthy dose of fun and spectacle, behind which Russia's many problems were obscured, with nary a discouraging word to be heard on matters such as the Russian government's stealth decision to raise the retirement age, or the fatal cloak and dagger dance going on between Russia and the United Kingdom, or UK, if you prefer saying it that way. Next year, the world's finest women's soccer players will meet in France and appropriate enough, right, to contest their own title, but not long after that, attention will swing back to the men once more. Yay, men. You need attention. Who in 2022 will compete again, this time in the Arab Gulf nation of Qatar. Those hoping for a competition with fewer geopolitical implications are going to be disappointed, and that's the optimistic take. For while Russia's cup took place against the backdrop of great power interplay, Qatar's relative obscurity on the grand political stage will nevertheless present participants and fans with a very grave and unsettling moral disorder to ponder. It has been reported that when President Bill Clinton, who served as the honorary chairman of the United States' own bid to win the 2022 World Cup, found that he had lost out to Qatar, he returned to his Zurich hotel room. There's trouble in Zurich hotel rooms for FIFA things, I've learned in the past, and reached for an ornament on a table, which he then threw at a wall mirror, a large mirror on a wall, in a fit of rage, shattering the glass. That sounds expensive, but I guess all expenses were covered for him on that, and that seems excessive. But okay. Clinton has since denied having participated in this fit of minor vandalism. I would too. But you almost couldn't fault him for his reaction. Qatar's win was, to say the least, a shock. And you and I both know why. While Qatar has taken recent strides in developing a local league system for which it is actively recruiting talent from Africa, and that's a good thing, the nation can't be said to have a particularly noteworthy football culture. Its men's team has never qualified for a World Cup, a FIFA Confederations Cup, or an Olympic Games. In fact, its most significant accomplishment is being a 3-time winner of the minor Arab Gulf League tournament. The automatic qualification of Qatar will receive, the automatic qualification that they will receive as hosts will be the first time it has been within sniffing distance, and that's not don't sniff around this trophy. Sniffing distance of a major trophy. I wouldn't be sniffing anything at a FIFA competition, to be honest. It's good, healthy competition and good, honest sweat and everything, but that doesn't mean I have to sit there and sniff it. You might enjoy it. I don't know, and I don't want to know about it. But, look, the distance is the distance. There's nothing we can do about that. I will say this. Qatar, it's their national team, obviously, I'll take their word for it here, haven't qualified for any major international competitions. But Qatar, as an entity, the state, I assume, state-run, state-affiliated airlines, Qatar Airlines, does a lot of sponsorship of really big-time major international soccer and big-time European leagues. And you see their logo all over the uniforms all across Europe. And so they're not exactly strangers to big-time football, I guess you could say. But, that's a different thing, of course, to say, yeah, they'll be fielding a team, they'll be in the World Cup, and they'll be hosting the tournament. Anyway, Qatar is also a rather inhospitable place, they point out, for the world's most celebrated soccer tournament. Stiflingly humid, which is amazing because I thought desert. Oh, it's a dry heat, at least. No, it's humid. Throughout the warmer months, its summertime temperatures reliably soar into the triple digits. That would be for us Fahrenheit, folks. A factor which forced FIFA to move the tournament's kickoff to late November. There you are, the monkeying with the calendar that we spoke of a few minutes ago. That move will bring chaos to most of the world's major soccer leagues. That's a big problem, you see, because their top players will have to take leave from their club teams in the middle of their seasons to compete for their national teams, in addition to taking time to recover from the World Cup's unforgiving schedule. The social climate of the Arab nation may be as jarring for both visiting free-spirited soccer fans and their corporate brands that typically drape themselves over whatever empty space upon which a television camera might alight. Qatar operates under strict Wahhabi-influenced Sharia law, like the Saudis, which is interesting given their tensions, which attaches harsh criminal penalties to such things as alcohol consumption, which is forbidden in all but a few venues for these games, and anything that might be termed an illicit sexual practice. The pressure of welcoming the world's soccer fans have forced Qataris to relent somewhat on policing activities that might otherwise earn Muslims some very harsh penalties. For instance, there will be FIFA fan zones where alcohol consumption is permitted. but soccer fans who might otherwise be accustomed to big open cities in which to gambol and explore are going to have to adjust to life inside a theocratic autocracy. That's going to be rather difficult. I don't know whether it'll be more difficult to do than it is to say, but we will see. In 2011, Qatar played host to the Asian Cup final between Japan and Australia at Khalifa International Stadium in Doha, and as trial runs for staging a major soccer tournament goes, this did not go well. Let's read about it. As Al Jazeera's Paul Rice reported, thousands of fans were turned away despite having tickets after police imposed a lockout. That won't go well. According to the report, a complete lack of management at the stadium's points of entry seemed to be the cause of the chaos. Per Rice, the official attendance of the final was 37,174. But other fans said their tickets had not been checked properly as they entered the 40,000 capacity arena. When we got to the ground, not one person checked our tickets. We were just ushered through, said one Australia fan. No barcode scanners like at the other matches I'd attended. They were all broken. Oh, they had them, but they just didn't work. We didn't even have our tickets looked at. We didn't have to present them to gate staff, grandstand staff, no one. So how they got an official attendance is beyond me. And the answer is, Western governments expect us to have an official attendance, so let's make up an official attendance, I guess. Interesting thought, though, the idea like no barcode scanners. It's not an absolute, well, maybe with such an international crowd, it would be absolutely necessary to give them as much of what they're used to in terms of control and rules as possible. But I will say this. Doha is not a place that you can just, wander to and accidentally end up and say, I'm just going to go, and if I don't get tickets, I'll just try to get in. I mean, I think that they meant to scan the tickets and all the scanners were broken. But, yeah, you're not going to wander in off the street and just find yourself at the football stadium in Doha, I don't think. Not as a European, anyway. In all likelihood, they probably just said, anybody who looks vaguely, foreign, you just assume they're, here for the soccer match. If they look like they're, if they're washed and dressed to European standards, just get out of the way, essentially. I bet that was good enough for them. And then, what are we going to do about attendance? I don't know. Make up a number. Just make sure it's under 40,000, or else the Qatari fire marshals will be on your ass, and you don't want that. Nothing worse than Wahhabist fire marshals. I'm making that up. Thousands more fans, the Paul Rice report concludes, or at least this excerpt concludes, thousands more fans were stopped from leaving after Japan beat Australia 1-0 in extra time, being held within the perimeter of the stadium behind locked fences due to a fireworks display that was being launched outside the grounds. Interesting. So they'll want to coordinate that, and I am sure they learned a lot of lessons from it. What then, Jason Linkins continues, did Qatar bring to the table? This is the interesting part here. I think the short answer, a mountain of petrochemical wealth. The nation consistently is ranked as having the world's highest per capita income, and I think that comes mostly from lots of oil income and fewer capitas than most places, as measured by the International Monetary Fund. And in FIFA, the sport's global governing body, Qatar found a partner more than willing to court a little corruption. Over the years, FIFA has consistently been exposed as a gang of blackguards masquerading as an international sporting concern. That's pretty straightforward. In his 2014 book, Omerta, Scottish investigative reporter Andrew Jennings, who you heard about over the break, a long-time and fastidious chronicler of FIFA's delinquency, wrote that the leadership of FIFA tick all the boxes defining an organized crime syndicate. So it was hardly surprising when, in 2014, the Sunday Times reported that Qatar's successful bid hinged on $5 million in bribes paid to various officials. And as the BBC summarized for those without access to the Times' paywalled report, The Sunday Times has obtained millions of secret documents, emails, letters, bank transfers, which it alleges are proof that the disgraced Qatari football official Mohammed bin Hammam made payments totaling $5 million in the U.S., £3 million in England, to football officials in return for their support for the Qatar bid. The documents also show how bin Hammam was making payments directly to football officials in Africa to allegedly buy their support for Qatar in the contest. FIFA Vice President Michael Piattini made all the appropriate noises in the wake of the report, assuring everyone that, quote, if corruption is proven, FIFA will take a new vote. But, as you may have heard, Qatar is still sitting pretty as the tourney's next host. Meanwhile, it's probably worth noting that only 22 members of FIFA's 24-person executive committee were available to offer rulings on the host bids because, as Grantland's Brian Phillips noted, 2 members had been, quote, caught trying to sell their votes to undercover journalists, unquote. That is not good. Criminal geniuses these are not, but the limited accountability under which FIFA has traditionally operated has meant that officials have mastered the delicate art of promising reforms that never really quite arrive and looking the other way in the meantime. But there's something else about Qatar's World Cup that may not be so easily dismissed. At some point during the bidding process, the Qatari officials would have had to account for the means by which they'd create the world-class soccer infrastructure that the tournament demands. They would have had to lay out their core competency in areas like stadium construction. And while we can't precisely account for what FIFA may have been told then, we absolutely can explain how Qatar has gone about building the World Cup of their dreams. The answer is a forced labor arrangement that resembles a modern form of slavery, which is not supposed to be a modern thing at all. Qatar's labor practices include something called the kafala system. Ooh, let's learn. An arrangement that exists in different forms throughout the Arab Peninsula. The system is meant to monitor and manage migrant workers who come to places like Qatar from poorer nations. The Guardian has reported that work in advance of the World Cup has brought an influx of migrant laborers from Nepal and India. If you've ever thrilled at the sight of Dubai's futuristic cityscape, it's all built on very similar labor practices in the neighboring United Arab Emirates. To find work in Qatar, migrants must first find an employer to sponsor them, to whom they are subsequently bound. Migrant workers are thus shut out of any means to negotiate for better pay or conditions or seek better wages with a different sponsor. What's more, Qatar's exit visa system means that migrants cannot leave Qatar without their passports and paperwork, all of which their sponsors control, which means that those who find themselves working in harsh conditions could find themselves trapped within Qatar's borders, with no choice but to maintain their indentured servitude. Naturally, the Qataris themselves do not have to suffer under these sorts of labor practices. This is bred, within Qatari society, a pernicious class divide, with one privileged group of people inventing and enforcing draconian rules over an underclass of non-citizens of different ethnicities and national origins. As such, Qataris have little understanding and empathy for the people who literally get crushed under the marble stones that pave their 5-star hotel lobbies. Sounds sort of bad. Nevertheless, as you might imagine, these labor practices frequently run afoul of international human rights organizations. As Human Rights Watch's Nicholas McGeehan told CNN in May of 2013, it's the same old story. The kafala system, the confiscation of passports, the illegal charging of exorbitant agent fees, the inability for workers to access the courts for redress. Qatar has an exit visa system, so you cannot leave the country without the sponsors say. You have a system where workers are trapped in the country and the same old abuses rear their head. Unpaid wages, wages held in arrears. It keeps workers credibly vulnerable, he added. And, it's easy to understand. And, I guess it makes a lot of sense to the Qataris, just not the rest of the world. More about this as we head into our third and final break. But just a brief pause to make sure we get our timing right on the music there. Maybe we can fit in another sentence or two here before we head out. It's important to note that none of this is specific to the Men's World Cup. That's true. Don't forget about that. These labor practices have long been a Qatari tradition. The means by which they've built their international airport, the fancy Doha digs enjoyed by all manner of international conferences, and the international campuses of many prominent American universities. Yes, we have a role in this too. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, that are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, ready for our exciting conclusion. We'll continue with Jason Lincoln's piece for Think Progress on World Cup and FIFA corruption and how the next competition landed in Qatar. And I think we're getting towards the end of this thing. But, some of you following along, noting Parleo, for instance, noting that Qatar's World Cup is a winter tournament for the first time ever. And, that'll happen eventually. I guess it just, I don't know. I would have thought that it would have made more sense elsewhere. But, hey, maybe not. I don't know. Where were we? We had mentioned that this was not something that is specific to the World Cup with respect to how the Qataris manage their workers. It's pretty much everything that's done there, everything that's done. It happens a lot in Saudi Arabia and in the United Arab Emirates, as they noted before. And also, by the way, of course, we learned an awful lot about the way the corruption worked, not necessarily in exactly the same way with the indentured servitude of foreign workers, but certainly foreign workers not very well treated, I am sure, in their construction projects in Russia this time around either. And, of course, I had put the emphasis on the fact that it was the Men's World Cup. I assume that wherever they hold the Women's World Cup, similar, there's no reason to believe that the Women's World Cup involves no corruption, though perhaps less corruption maybe because there's less money at stake, but I don't think all that much less. I don't know what the ticket prices are like there. And certainly construction of any stadiums would require a lot of money changing hands, and so there's plenty of grafting opportunity there too. It just works differently, I'm sure, in France than it does in Qatar. However, we left off by noting that among the many items of the infrastructure in Doha and I'm sure elsewhere in the Arabian Peninsula that are built with these arrangements are the properties of American universities, which I'm sure once they get around to realizing exactly what's going on, it's ripe for student protest, I suppose. Although I wonder, I don't know, maybe too many students looking forward to spending a semester abroad in one of these facilities to look very much into how it was built. But surely there are some students of conscience who will bring it up. We'll see whether it catches on anytime in the near future. But back to the article here. In short, there's a long list of institutions that are implicated in Qatar's horrific labor practices. Probably something we're doing too. Mike, the Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters 2 that I'm building in Doha, I'm going to have to look into it. But the Men's World Cup has brought new light and attention to the matter, and that's a good thing. And in recent years, Qatar has faced increasing scrutiny. In 2014, the International Trade Union Confederation, or ITUC, released a scathing report that characterized Qatar as a country without a conscience. And that's a quote. As Deadspin's Tom Lay reported, the ITUC bore witness to a parade of horrors, many of which were provided by first-person accounts from the migrant workers themselves. One read, "I went on site this morning at 5 a.m., and there was blood everywhere. I don't know what happened, but it was covered up with no report. When I reported this, I was told that if I didn't stop complaining, I would be dismissed." It wouldn't be such a bad thing necessarily to be dismissed from all of that, but I guess people need the money, and I don't know whether getting dismissed also means, you get to leave the country and go back home. You might just have to hang around and panhandle or something. Who knows? As Lay noted at the time, the ITUC estimated that 4,000 migrant workers will die before the 2022 World Cup, an estimate based on mortality trends previously reported by embassies within the country. 4,000 people will die to make the stadiums and hotels and other venues at which you or someone much like you will enjoy the festivities at the 2022 World Cup. The ITUC's findings did not go over well in Qatar, but the government nevertheless commissioned international law firm DLA Piper to take on a fact-finding mission. As The Guardian reported in May of 2014, the report by the international law firm DLA Piper calls for changes to the much-criticized kafala system that ties workers to their employers. It also contains the Qatari government's own figure on the numbers of migrants who have died on its soil. 964 from Nepal, India, and Bangladesh in 2012 and 2013. In all, 246 died from, quote, sudden cardiac death in 2012, the report said. 35 died in falls and 28 committed suicide. The number of deaths resulting from work-related injuries was low, although, you don't think sudden cardiac death probably has something to do with the work, and the falls obviously do, and quite honestly, the suicide, is it because, like, boy, oh boy, I hate Wahhabism that they're killing themselves? I mean, maybe in a roundabout way, but probably, no, I'm trapped, I'm enslaved here in Qatar, and I'll never get out. That's work-related because you're enslaved, you see. DLA Piper's report made 62 recommendations for reform, but none of these appear to have been taken up with much zeal. In November of 2014, The Guardian's Pete Pattison reported that thousands of migrant laborers from North Korea, interesting, let's tie it all together, have been found working on construction sites in Qatar, their presence facilitated by an arrangement between those two nations that amounted to state-sponsored slavery. Wow, who could have possibly suspected either of these two? But in particular, the North Koreans of engaging in slave labor practices. They're such fine people, and we love their glorious leader so much. It's very disappointing. Anyway, per Pattison's reporting here, according to testimonies from workers and defectors, laborers from the reclusive state, North Korea, said they receive almost no salaries in person while in the Gulf Emirates during the 3 years they typically spend there. They work in the expectation they will collect their earnings when they return to North Korea. I mean, what a great sounding deal. I assume they had little to no choice in that arrangement. But yeah, among maybe the worst bets in the world would be, why don't you go to Qatar for 3 years, and when you get back to North Korea, we'll have all your money for you, and then we'll just give it to you in one lump sum. Okay. I mean, what's the alternative, really, living in North Korea? Well, anyway, According to a series of testimonies, you'll never believe this, from defectors and experts, workers receive as little as 10% of their salaries. I'm amazed they get anything when they go home, and some may receive nothing. That's about what I would have expected. One North Korean worker at a construction site in central Doha told The Guardian, "We are here to earn foreign currency for our nation." And maybe that's just a different approach that they take. I suppose we should at least entertain the possibility, but I don't know if we can really put it on a par with, our own Western practices, which suck in many ways, but the idea that you're being sent, that you should agree to do this, knowing what's going to happen. The mission is to earn foreign currency for your nation. I mean, that doesn't fly in most places, but maybe they can somehow get people to buy into the notion in North Korea. The following May, German television journalists, in a broad report on FIFA's corruption, further documented the harsh working conditions in which Qatar's migrant workforce labored. As Deadspin's Diana Moskowitz reported, journalists working on the project said they were detained, had all their material erased, and their equipment demolished while shooting in Qatar. It's no wonder that in October of 2015, the ITUC again condemned the nation for allowing modern slavery to thrive, with ITUC General Secretary Sharon Burrow declaring promises of reform have been used as a smokescreen to draw in companies and governments to do business in Qatar as the Gulf state rolls out massive infrastructure developments to host the 2022 FIFA World Cup. In March of 2016, Amnesty International joined the fray in earnest with an 80-page report titled "The Ugly Side of the Beautiful Game: Labor Exploitation on a Qatar World Cup Venue." Drawing on first-person accounts from more than 200 migrant workers in Qatar, Amnesty International found the host nation playing the same old game. As CNN reported, the abuses found include workers living in squalid and cramped accommodations, employers confiscating workers' passports, workers being threatened for complaining about working conditions, workers having to pay as much as $4,300 to recruiters in their home country to get a job in Qatar, along with some not being paid for months. Qatari officials stridently disputed Amnesty's report. We stridently object. Oh, well, stridently object. That's different. Complaining that their study was not representative of the entire migrant workforce and insisting that many of the accounts predated reforms. In a statement to CNN, the nation's Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, wow, okay, wrote, quote, "We have always maintained this World Cup will act as a catalyst for change. It will not be built on the backs of exploited workers," except that it will. It's not clear that the committee understood that offering up such a declaration was insufficient in ameliorating abuses which had already taken place. For Amnesty International General Secretary Salil Shetty's part, it was too little too late. The abuse of migrant workers is a stain on the conscience of world football, said Shetty, but I guess world football doesn't feel the same way. It's not clear that significant change has occurred in Qatar in recent months. In March of 2017, the United Nations International Labour Organization, or ILO, gave Qatar a November 2017 deadline, quote, "to implement new labor reforms designed to end abuse of migrant workers or potentially face an investigation by an international labor watchdog in the lead up to hosting the 2022 World Cup," unquote. Ooh, not an international watchdog. In June of this year, Human Rights Watch offered Qatar some praise for their mild domestic labor reforms, but persisted in their calls for the plight of migrant workers to be addressed, as well as recommending that the kafala system be ended in full. Throughout years of scrutiny, various officials have threatened to review and potentially revoke Qatar's bid. It's a little late now, but none of these threats have seemed particularly toothsome, and indeed, the run-up to Qatar's first turn as host to a major sports event continues apace. Those who might have the power to bring about change in Qatar or speed a process of finding a more appropriate host for the Cup such as the major international soccer federations or the corporate brands that typically lend their imprimatur to such events, have so far muted their voices. It's very possible that when all is said and done, the players themselves will be called upon to answer for the abuses that built the Qatari World Cup. Meanwhile, what's being built in Qatar to facilitate the grandest contest in men's soccer looks breathtakingly beautiful. Architectural feats that hold the promise of an incredible science fiction world awaiting us in the near future. But seen under the brightest lights, shot in high definition, one might do well to remember that they were all paid for by the blood of the poor, if you really want to put a fine point on it, and I guess he does. That's the way we end this report. Thanks to Jason Lincolns for taking a look and bringing us up to date on what we can expect next from this just conveyor belt of corruption and human rights abuses that is the FIFA World Cup. But damn, I like watching the soccer on TV as much as the next guy, and so long as the next guy is American, because we together don't care all that much about it. I made an effort to see if I could watch some of the games. I thought it would be fun to watch the games in Europe, and I found it got in the way of my schedule of glacier climbing and iceberg calving, essentially. So I didn't get a chance to do it. But, clearly many more people around the world enjoy watching the game a lot more than I do, and they're not likely to give it up over human rights abuses, no matter how egregious, which is really kind of sad in a way, and I guess we have the opportunity to change that outcome as time goes on. And as I thought was a point interestingly made in some of the materials I provided to you while I was away, it was an interesting moment, briefly, when it looked like the United States, which doesn't have the same attachment to international soccer that the rest of the world has, might be the only major country with investigative resources that would be able to pull off an investigation like this and lay the whole thing bare. But then I guess the flip side of that, as it turns out, is the rest of the world doesn't care what Americans have to say about soccer. We don't even call it by the right name, so they feel like they don't have to listen to us. Anyway, I just thought a very interesting look ahead in all of this. What to spend the rest of our time on that brings us up to date and gets us ready for the rest of the week. I don't know. This one looks a little complicated, but maybe we'll go over here and just pick up on some of the more general themes that we're clearly going to have to deal with in the next couple of days. It would be difficult to pass over this Daily Beast piece, and it seems pretty short too, from David Rothkopf that was being shared widely yesterday. And who can blame us for sharing it widely given the title? The way Trump and the GOP deal with Russian attacks, to get back to that topic, is, quote, textbook treason. You can't pass up an article like that, and it's good to see the term appearing in headlines, even if it hasn't yet worked its way into what we would call papers of record, and they may never get around to it. This is an extraordinary moment, Rothkopf writes. It is without equal, not only in American history, but in modern history. That would mean like the rest of the world as well. The indictments of the 12 Russian military officers accused of engaging in a coordinated attack on the United States to try to make their preferred candidate our president are a vital reminder that the Mueller investigation cannot and must not be seen as a political issue. I mean, too bad about that, because that's how it'll be seen, but okay, I get your point. The fact that on Friday, we also heard from our Director of National Intelligence, a conservative GOP former senator from Indiana, that the cyber offensive, of which the GRU, Russian military intelligence, attacks were part of, is ongoing, this attack, and that we are at a critical point in which the warning signs are there is also salient. Yes, it is. And that's why we made the decision to go back to this topic for the end of the show. It is not an accident that both these strong statements were made as the U.S. president prepared for his ill-considered and unnecessary private meeting with Vladimir Putin, the man who certainly approved, oversaw, and continues to oversee these attacks. It is clear that the intelligence and law enforcement communities of the United States, adhering to the principles of patriotism enumerated by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein on Friday, felt that a message needed to be sent to the Russians that we were on to them. Well, okay. It's a good message. Typically, the president would deliver such a message, but this president has proven to be the staunchest defender of Putin and the most active advocate of covering up or denying these attacks. He did it again this week, even while aware of the indictments. Do the indictments and the Coates statement, again, both delivered by Republicans, also send a message they do not fully trust the president to deliver that message or to press the Russians on it? I believe they do, and I agree. I also believe the same. Further, the White House response to the indictments, which again does not deal with the ongoing threat to our democracy posed by the Russians, but instead wrongly seeks to exonerate the president from his involvement in this affair, confirms the wisdom of their actions. This is an extraordinary moment. It is without equal, not only in American history, but in modern history. A hostile foreign power intervened in our election to help elect a man president who has since actively served their interests and has defended them at every turn. And interestingly, of course, we're watching people's reactions this morning on Twitter to, I guess, some of Trump's latest blatherings, also on Twitter, insisting that the sad state of affairs as between the United States and Russia is our own fault. In other words, people were very quick to point out that this was blame America first-ism, which used to be the favorite line of attack leveled by Republicans against Democrats, and that's odd and hypocritical and weird and indicative of some major problems. But, it makes no dent in Trump's head, obviously. But, another example of amazing hypocrisy and everything having been stood on its head. Congratulations. Get in line. Add it to the pile, I guess. But all true. You're not wrong for pointing it out. Now, Trump may deny collusion, this piece continues, but given that this attack continues, denying it is collusion, distracting from it is collusion, obstructing the investigation of it is collusion, because all these things enable it to go on. They're predicate acts. That's what I had to say about McConnell. It is more than the fact that he did nothing about it. It is that he actively prevented anyone else from doing anything about it. Of course, Donald Trump also spent the weekend insisting that all of the Russian interference was Obama's fault because it took place on his watch. However, of course, as we have pointed out, McConnell was instrumental in making sure that the Obama response to the attack was hamstrung, muted, and it was done very, obviously, an outwardly political way. If you try to do anything about this, we will make it a political problem. Now, this article is supposedly making the point that it's not to be viewed as a political problem because it affects all of us, but it didn't matter to McConnell. Add that, of course, to the evidence we've had for a long time, and I've always been surprised that this never really became a bigger story, except among our crowd, that we have tape recordings of the Speaker of the House insisting that everybody stay quiet about this stuff. And we always suspected, and it's more than suspected. We knew. There was evidence there. Some of the evidence that was, or the stories that were laid out in the indictments, I don't know, I guess somehow it struck people as new information. But it's been clear for a long time, for instance, that there were congressional candidates on the Republican side that benefited directly from the Russian interference, that actually received data from the hacks perpetrated by the Russians and used them in their campaigns. That's not new information. We know about it happening in Florida, in the one contest in Florida, and probably in some others. But, you know, we made a very big deal out of this when when that tape recording came to light of Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy blurting out essentially that they believed that Donald Trump was on the take from Vladimir Putin, and so was Dana Rohrabacher, but that the best approach to what to do with all of this knowledge, according to Paul Ryan, was keep quiet. And from there, it sort of became speculation, but it had the ring of truth to it. Why would you keep quiet about it? Why would you keep it in the family? And one of the only obvious answers was because you will benefit from it. It may have been indirect. You'll benefit from it because we currently hold a majority in Congress, are very unlikely to lose that majority in Congress in 2016. But on top of all of this, we'll likely get a Republican president who will sign our tax bills, etc. Not that they've turned out to work for anything except for, of course, stealing loads of money from out of the Treasury. That's what they were after, so I guess that worked pretty well for them. But it was more than, well, shut up and we'll get our way on policy. It was many of us will be benefiting from this directly. And I don't know why that's treated as new information, but I guess corroborating evidence that is new allows some people to say that they now believe that such a thing happened. And so to them, it's new. To us, it seems like old news. Anyway, yeah, so the point of this being, as he says here, to deny collusion is itself collusion. To distract from it is collusion. Obstruct the investigation of it is collusion, because all these things enabled it to go on, as did the predicate acts of Mitch McConnell saying, I will make a political problem out of this for you if you try to stop it, because I know that you'll be targeting Republicans when you do it, but that's only because they're the only ones actively involved in it. It's not my fault. I'm not selectively targeting people. I'm targeting everybody who's involved in sharing stolen information. It's just that only you idiots are agreeing to take this information from the Russians. And we should have been talking more about Paul Ryan saying, whatever you do, don't talk about it. Because, by the way, just one more thing about those recordings. I know I've said it before in the past, but just to reiterate, it's more than just that there were Republicans receiving information from it. It's more than just that they thought they would win the presidency. Remember that a good portion of that conversation is about their realization through having met with the Ukrainian delegation that it was the current and ongoing practice of the Russians to interfere in foreign elections, and that they had just been told the extent to which they had done it in the Ukraine, and that it was at least beginning to dawn on them, since they believed that Dana Rohrabacher was on the take from Putin and that Trump was probably on the take from Putin, that it could be happening to the United States right then and there. And still the answer was yes, but shh, because it will help Republicans. Now, I don't think this should be viewed as a partisan situation. You know, well, that's not the way the other guys viewed it, and look what they've done with it. Maybe we ought to be viewing it as a partisan situation. We're too embarrassed to do it, but maybe we ought to be. Anyway, let's wrap up here a little bit. It looks like we probably won't. Maybe we can speed to the end if we talk over the music at the end. That the president is abetted in his aid for the Russians, again, in the midst of this ongoing attack by the leadership of the Republican Party, as I was saying, makes the situation all the more extraordinary and dangerous, although he's talking about a different kind, I think, of abetting. That is, they're just standing idly by rather than affirmatively doing what they can to further the conspiracy. As Republicans seek to undermine the investigation, they serve Russia as directly as if they were officers of the GRU. Some now reportedly seek to impeach Rosenstein on trumped-up charges, to attack one of our national defense leaders as we are being attacked, and to do so to benefit a foreign adversary is textbook treason. Very interesting. That is strong language, but consider this. If we updated our definitions of war to include cyber war, and I think we're going to have to at some point, then aiding a foreign power engaged in such a war against us would certainly meet the constitutional definition. I've done it. You've seen me do it. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. When only semantics protect our president and our ruling party from the harsh sentences treason demands, death penalty, by the way, we need to recognize the severity of the situation. But more importantly, we need to recognize one of the most important implications of yesterday. That would have been Friday, of course. While we who watch or chat on cable news have lost the plot here, while the GOP makes it about personal attacks on FBI officers, while the president makes it about him, while many of us make it about partisan politics, Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein have kept their eye on the ball. They recognize, as Coates does, and as do the leaders of our intelligence community, and as does every law enforcement and national security expert with whom I have spoken, that this is, above all, and most urgently, a national security crisis for the United States. There is much more, of course, to the article. Not that much more either, but there's much more happening out there in the wider world, and if you would be, let's say interested in hearing it discussed on the radio, let me recommend for you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next with Justice Putnam. Let's see if we can't get a sampling of all the wonderful stuff coming up.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Hey, yeah, look at this. The Kushner family faces a lawsuit for forcing tenants out of a rent-controlled Brooklyn building. 2 black Atlanta students were harassed by police following a 911 complaint over handing out political flyers. And state opposition to pipeline construction angers Trump's supporters in Washington. What do you think of that? All coming up next.